Greetings, Music 100 students. This is the pre-lecture to our class on the Baroque, our first class on the Baroque. We'll be looking at the Baroque for a couple of classes. Today, we'll be focusing on understanding the Baroque in the broadest sense, and also looking at a new form that helps define it, specifically opera. I hope that you were able to make some summary points from a class on the Renaissance. Now, I hope that you were able to use the 5 framing questions in preparing for class as well as for reviewing the last class. Also, in giving you another tool to use, I hope that in your listening that you may be able to put to use the guide to listening actively and critically to music that I've posted in Moodle. I've mentioned this in the past. I thought I would go back and highlight it again. So in using this with Wright's active listening guides, I hope those are some tools that will help you in gathering all of the information, in gathering all of the experiences and all the reflections in the music that we're studying, the music that we're talking about, and in the times, the eras that we're talking about, that may lead to a greater understanding and knowledge of the material we're studying. So, getting into today's topic of looking at the Baroque. There are 2 forces that I wanted to talk about in this pre-lecture that are important in helping to understand this time, and we'll see these as we begin to get into music. Those 2 forces being the age of absolutism and the age of science. And what exactly does this mean? In the age of absolutism, what I'm referring to is the divine right to rule, and to rule absolutely. In responding to this, we can see an emphasis in grandiosity, growth in interest in drama. Architecturally, we can see it in many magnificent palaces. 2 worth looking at right now would be this one in Vienna, the Schönbrunn Palace, which was the summer palace of the ruling family, the Habsburgs, which is now just sort of in Vienna proper. If you go into the interior, the Grand Hall, a place during the 20th century that was famous for the meeting of our President Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, and Khrushchev met in this hall in the 1960s. And then Versailles, the Versailles Palace in France, probably one of the most famous palaces in all of Europe. This is the chapel inside. So, a time of grandiosity, but I also mentioned a time of drama. We can see that in comparing these 2 paintings, and I will come back to these in class, just as I did before. I'm using the same painting by Raphael that I used in the Renaissance, and looking at one by Peter Paul Rubens, Massacre of the Innocents. I'll be asking you to look at this and tell me what you see, to compare and contrast, and what we learn from looking at these, and how that may help inform our understanding of music. And then today we'll be looking at a form of drama in music, that is through this new form called opera. I'll be interested in what you can tell me about the evolution, the founding and then the evolution of opera. Music's role in the age of absolutism is quite prominent. And that is, music was sponsored as it never was before, mostly at the service of these secular lords. It was used in every function of royal life, from hunts to balls to background music, and of course in the spectacle of opera. So I'll be asking about that in class. How does opera fit into this picture of the age of absolutism? I also said, though, that this was the age of science, a time where there was an interest in scientific observation, where there were developments of systems of knowledge, of human intellect and reason, and as well as the control with human intellect and reason over its environments, such as in structured geometric gardens that we can see here. We can see in science, for example, of Johannes Kepler, looking at the laws of planetary motion, and Sir Isaac Newton exploring the laws and writing about the laws of gravity. Within philosophy, within aesthetics, we can see it in the work of this person, René Descartes. René Descartes was a philosopher who developed what has become known as the doctrine of affections. Wright talks about it in this book, and I'll be very interested in some observations that you would have in this, in looking at the doctrine of affections. Going back to this idea that I had just mentioned about the development of systems of knowledge, one could see this in something that was developed in the visual arts, in taking a look at the doctrine of affections and certain prescriptions that were used by painters, that there would be certain expressions or turns of the head and the like that were intended to express particular moods, feelings, human feelings of affections. So in the middle line, for example, you can see in the second head, if you in the visual arts, if you wanted to express desire, that was one way of doing it, or just below it, of anger. So these are ways of showing that there was an interest in developing ways of essentially demonstrating feelings. And this was something that was very important in music as well, the idea of demonstrating feelings through certain chords, through certain melodic gestures, of applying a particular universality of artistic organization. There was a belief, or Descartes would espouse, that the principal aim of music is to arouse the passions or affections. So in music, this manifested itself in a couple of ways, in the ways of demonstrating feelings. There was a desire to focus on one effect in a composition or movement, and another way was through the codification of certain musical elements. This is probably one of the most important identifying features of this music. That, along with the idea of focusing generally on one affect for a piece of music. We'll be looking a little more at the whole idea of affections in class. But in music, many of the ways that included this codification included developing a new tuning system, that is a systematic approach to tuning. We'll be looking at something called basso continuo, that is of harmonizing music in a particular way, and also the development of standardized forms. That is, developing forms that are essentially a rational method of composition that followed certain compositional procedures. In getting ready for class, I'd like you to consider this particular question. What general aspects of music from the Baroque, and specifically from opera, serve as examples of qualities of the age, specifically looking at the age of absolutism and the age of science? In preparing for class and in reading Wright's text, I would encourage you to pay attention to these particular terms. I'll be going over these in class. And speaking of class, I'll look forward to seeing you there.